Everyone in the neighborhood heard the crunch that night. The sound of metal against concrete, a jarring noise that made my stomach twist before I even looked outside. And when I did, there it was again, her car parked halfway across my driveway, wheels crooked like it had been thrown there in anger. For the third time this week. I stood frozen at the window, fists clenched, heart pounding with that same helpless fury I thought I'd buried long ago. Why did it always have to be me? Why did she always choose my driveway? Coincidental, that was her name. Fitting, really. Our self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, the kind of woman who turned neighborhood meetings into courtrooms, the kind of neighbor who smiled with thin lips when you passed but sharpened her claws the moment your back was turned. She wasn't just difficult, she was relentless. And she had decided, for reasons I still couldn't understand, that I was her favorite target. I remember the first time she blocked me in. It had been a Saturday morning. I was late for work, coffee still steaming on the counter, my bag slung over one shoulder. And there she was, her shiny SUV planted squarely across my driveway like a barricade. I tapped on her door, trying to keep my voice calm, polite even. She opened it with a smirk like she'd been waiting. "Oh, I didn't realize you needed to leave," she said, dragging out the words like honey gone sour. She didn't move the car for another 20 minutes. I was late. My boss noticed. She knew exactly what she was doing. After that, it became a pattern. Sometimes she'd block half the driveway, sometimes all of it. Sometimes she'd even angle her car so it looked like an accident, like maybe she just parked too close, just a mistake. But it was. Not once. And every time I felt that same slow burn in my chest, that helpless ache that comes when someone is stealing not just your space, but your peace. I tried reporting it to the HOA. Of course, that went nowhere. She was the HOA, president, chairwoman, judge, jury. Complaints got lost in processing. Meetings turned into lectures, me being scolded for not keeping the neighborhood spirit. She had allies, too, people who laughed at her jokes and nodded when she spoke. People who didn't want to end up on her bad side. I couldn't blame them, but it left me alone against Coincidental. That night, though, something inside me cracked. I stood there in the dark, staring at her car sprawled across my driveway again, headlights still faintly ticking as the engine cooled. And all I could think was, why me? Why always me? I wanted to scream. I wanted to pound on her door, drag her out, force her to move it, but I didn't. I just stood there, shaking, silent, because I knew how that would end. She'd turn it around on me, make me the problem. She always did. The truth was, I had grown tired of fighting battles I couldn't win. Tired of being the reasonable one. Tired of pretending I could endure it. That's the thing about bullies, they feed on patience, on silence. And I had given her too much of both. So standing there under the yellow glow of I made a decision. Quiet, steady, terrifying in its clarity. I wouldn't let her win anymore. I wouldn't let her keep choking the air out of my life. Something had to change. I didn't know exactly how, not yet. But the thought wouldn't let me sleep that night. I tossed, turned, stared at the ceiling until the first thin light of dawn crept across the room. All I knew was this: her car wasn't just blocking my driveway anymore. It was blocking my dignity, my freedom, my right to breathe without her shadow falling across me. And when someone tries to take that from you, you don't just stand there forever. You fight back. The plan started forming in whispers, in fragments. What if her car wasn't there anymore? What if the one weapon she used against me suddenly vanished like smoke in the wind? The thought made me smile for the first time in weeks. Not a laugh, not even a grin, just a small, dangerous curl of the lips. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was peace. And maybe, just maybe, peace could only come once her car was gone for good. The morning after, I almost convinced myself it had been a dream. Maybe I'd imagined the way her headlights lit up my driveway. Maybe the sound of her tires grinding against the curb had been nothing more than a restless nightmare. But then I opened my front door, and there it was. Her SUV still planted across my driveway like a monument to her control. My chest tightened. The air felt heavy, stale, as if the whole street were watching, waiting for me to make a move. What kind of person leaves their car like that overnight? The answer was simple: someone who knew they could get away with it. And in our neighborhood, that person was Coincidental. She lived for these little power plays, tiny acts of sabotage that cut deeper because they looked so small, so harmless to outsiders. But to me, it wasn't small. It was suffocating. I walked around the car, my footsteps echoing against the pavement. The dew on the hood glistened under the rising sun, each drop a reminder of how long it had sat there untouched. And that's when I noticed something odd: her keys weren't inside. I'd half hoped she'd been careless, left them dangling in the ignition, but no. She was smarter than that, careful, methodical, Every part of this was calculated. That morning I called the HOA again. A different voice answered, but the response was the same. They'd look into it. Empty words. Words meant to buy time to wear me down. And by the way she smirked at me later, arms folded across her chest as I tried to pull out of my driveway, I knew she'd already heard. She always heard. Information flowed to her like water down a hill, fast and unstoppable. "You know, you should really be more careful," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard like nails on glass. "People might think you're being difficult." Difficult, the word rattled in my skull all day. It was the same word my old boss had used when I asked for a raise, the same word my ex had thrown at me when I finally demanded respect. Difficult. That's what people called you when you stopped letting them take advantage. I hated that word. By evening, the plan had started to crystallize. It wasn't about towing. No, I knew she'd find a way to spin that, make me the villain, and it wasn't about confrontation either. She thrived on conflict. She fed off the drama. No, if I was going to do this, it had to be clean, quiet, final. So I started watching, waiting, timing her movements. Every day, like clockwork, she left at 8:15 to head to the gym, coffee cup in hand, yoga mat slung across her shoulder. She returned at 9:45 sharp, a different kind of energy buzzing around her like static. And sometimes, just sometimes, she'd leave her car idling in the driveway for a few minutes before pulling into her garage. Little patterns, little cracks. And then one evening, as I lingered by the window, I noticed something that made my pulse race. She parked across my driveway again, but this time she hadn't locked the doors. She'd been distracted, arguing on the phone, waving her arms, packing the sidewalk before stomping inside. I knew because I'd stood there in the shadows, holding my breath, memorizing every detail. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the image of that car sitting there, unlocked, vulnerable. For the first time I realized she wasn't untouchable, not anymore. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, half terror, half exhilaration. But here's the strange thing. As tempting as it was, I didn't act, not that night. Because deep down I knew this wasn't just about the car, it was about me. About reclaiming something she'd stolen long before she ever parked in front of my driveway. My dignity, my right to exist without fear. So I waited for the right moment, the right weakness, the right crack in her perfect little armor. And when it came, I promised myself I wouldn't hesitate. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't the enemy outside your door. It's the moment you realize you're capable of fighting back, and I had finally reached that moment. Everyone says revenge feels sweet, but they never tell you about the silence before it happens. The heavy, suffocating quiet where every sound feels like a warning, every shadow a witness. That's the silence I sat in night after night, staring at her car through the blinds, wondering, imagining, waiting. What if I really could make it vanish? What if one morning she walked outside and found nothing but an empty stretch of pavement where her precious SUV used to be? The thought kept me awake. It wasn't about destroying her. It was about erasing the weapon she used against me, taking back what she stole every time she blocked my way. But wanting something and doing it, those are two very different things. Fear clung to me like a second skin. What if I got caught? What if the whole neighborhood turned against me, branded me the villain she always painted me to be? Those questions gnawed at me, made my hands tremble when I so much as touched the blinds. Still, the idea wouldn't die. If anything, it grew stronger. Every time she blocked my driveway again, it whispered louder. Every time she smirked at me during HOA meetings, it hissed in my ear. And one night, as I watched her slam her door shut after another long, loud phone call, I realized the risk wasn't in acting. The risk was in staying silent, because silence was what had trapped me all along. I started small, research, harmless really. I typed questions into my phone late at night, deleting the history before sunrise. How to move a car without keys? What happens if a car disappears? Some answers were ridiculous, others dangerous, but in between I found slivers of possibility. Ideas, methods, tricks. Things that made my pulse quicken because, for the first time, this wasn't just fantasy. And then came the second step, observation. I began studying her car, not just when she parked across my driveway, but when she didn't. I learned the sound of her engine, the slight whine it made when she turned it off too quickly. I noticed the dent near the rear bumper she always pretended wasn't there. I even timed how long it took her to notice little changes. Once, a fallen branch brushed against her hood and left a streak. She didn't clean it for 2 days. That told me something. She wasn't as attentive as she pretended. Still, a voice inside me kept whispering doubts. Was I really about to do this? Was I really about to cross a line I couldn't uncross? And in the quiet of those doubts, another memory returned. My father's voice, low and steady, years ago when I was a child facing down a bully at school. Sometimes, he'd said, you don't win by fighting harder. You win by outsmarting them, by making them believe they've already lost. That became my compass. I didn't want destruction. I wanted disappearance. Something that would make her question herself, make her realize she wasn't invincible. So I waited for the perfect night, for the perfect storm of opportunity, and finally it came. It was a Thursday evening. Rain slicked the pavement, turning the street into a mirror of distorted lights. Karen had come home late, arguing loudly on the phone, slamming her car door with enough force to make the whole block flinch. And when she stormed inside, she didn't bother locking her car. I saw it. I felt it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. My heart hammered so loudly I thought it might give me away. My hands shook as I pulled on a jacket as I stepped into the wet night air. Every nerve screamed at me to turn back, to shut the door, to let it go. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because in that moment, standing in the rain, I wasn't just thinking about a car. I was thinking about freedom, about dignity, about finally breathing without fear. And so, step by step, I walked toward her SUV. The rain masked my footsteps, the night cloaked me in shadows. The silence was gone now, replaced by something sharper, stronger, determination. What happened next? Well, that's the part no one saw, the part that changed everything. The rain was coming down so hard it blurred the world into streaks of silver. My breath fogged in the night air, shallow, quick, betraying the storm inside me. And then I saw it again. Her SUV hulking across my driveway like it belonged to her, droplets sliding down its black hood like it was laughing at me. And one question kept pounding in my head. What if, when she came back out, it was gone? I'd never been this close before. The smell of wet asphalt mixed with the faint tang of gasoline clung to the air as I reached out, fingertips brushing the cold metal of her door handle. I half expected alarms to scream, lights to flash, her voice to shriek from behind a curtain, but nothing happened. Just silence, heavy, daring silence. The door clicked open, unlocked, just as I'd seen from my window. My throat went dry. This was it, the thin line between imagining and doing. My father's words echoed again in the storm. You don't have to fight harder, you just have to outsmart them. I slid into the driver's seat. Her perfume lingered faintly on the upholstery, cloying, suffocating. My hands gripped the steering wheel, trembling. The keys weren't there, of course, but I'd prepared for that. I'd spent weeks researching, learning, testing. I'd bought a slim tool set online, nothing fancy, nothing illegal, at least not on paper, just enough to trick a car into rolling where I wanted it to roll. It wasn't about stealing, it wasn't about joyriding, it was about moving, removing, making her car disappear from the one place she used it as a weapon, my driveway. The rain pounded harder as I worked, each second stretching into eternity. My heart thudded in my ears, drowning out the storm, the world, everything but the fear that at any moment she'd fling her door open and catch me there. And then it shifted. The gear clicked. The car stirred. I held my breath as it began to move, inch by inch, tires rolling slowly, silently over the slick pavement. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to stop, but I kept pushing. Kept guiding it down the street, away from my house, away from her window. The further it rolled, the lighter I felt, like the weight pressing on my chest for months was finally lifting. By the time I left it 2 blocks over, tucked behind a row of hedges near an empty rental property, I was soaked through, shaking, breathless. I closed the door gently, the sound swallowed by the storm. And then I walked home, every step echoing with disbelief. I'd done it. Her car was gone. That night I barely slept. My mind raced with what-ifs. What if someone saw? What if she called the police? What if they traced it back to me? But alongside the fear was something else, relief. A fragile, intoxicating sense of freedom. For the first time in months, my driveway was empty. Mine. Morning came, and with it the storm inside her house. I heard it before I even looked outside, her voice, shrill and panicked, carrying down the street. "Where is it? Where is my car?" Blinds twitched open across the neighborhood. People peeked out, whispered. And there I stood at my window, calm, composed, watching her unravel. She stormed out barefoot, phone clutched in her hand, yelling into the receiver. Accusations flew about thieves, vandals, disrespect. She pointed at neighbors, demanded answers, cursed the HOA for not protecting her property. For once, she wasn't the queen. She was frantic, exposed. And I just watched, quiet, steady. For the first time, she didn't have power over me. But here's the thing about victories. They never last as long as you want them to. Because as I stood there, pride swelling in my chest, I knew this was only the beginning. Karen wasn't the kind of woman to let something like this go. No, she'd dig, she'd hunt, she'd claw at the truth until she found someone to blame. And deep down, I knew who she'd point her finger at first. Me. They say paranoia makes you see shadows where there are none. But when Karen's eyes locked on mine the next morning, I knew it wasn't paranoia. It was suspicion. Pure, sharp, dangerous suspicion. She stood in the middle of the street, hair wild, face flushed, phone still pressed against her ear as the police car pulled up. Neighbors lined the sidewalks, pretending to water lawns or collect newspapers, their curiosity burning holes in the air. And there I was, coffee mug in hand, standing on my porch like I had nothing to hide. But she didn't look at them, she looked at me. Her glare cut through the chatter, through the rain-soaked morning, through every flimsy layer of composure I'd tried to wrap around myself. And in that stare, I saw her mind working, piecing together the story she wanted to believe. Her car was gone, and I had motive. The officer stepped out calm, clipboard in hand. "Ma'am, when did you last see your vehicle?" he asked. "Last night," she snapped, her voice brittle. "It was right here, blocked across his driveway." She jabbed a finger toward me, my chest tightened, she hadn't even hesitated. The officer's gaze followed her finger, landing on me with a weight that made my hands sweat. "Sir, did you see anything suspicious?" I forced a slow sip of coffee, hiding the tremor in my hand. "Just the usual," I said evenly. "Car parked where it shouldn't be, again." A ripple of laughter spread through the neighbors, nervous, careful laughter, but enough to make Karen's jaw clench. She hated that, hated losing control of the room, the story, the image she painted of herself. For a moment I thought I'd won, that the officer might brush it off as another petty HOA squabble. But then Karen's voice dropped, low and dangerous. "He's been after me for months, complaints, accusations, and now my car disappears? Doesn't take a genius to put the pieces together." The officer raised an eyebrow, jotting notes. My stomach knotted. She was spinning her web, and once again I was the fly. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "do you have proof?" Her silence was sharp enough to cut glass. Proof. No, she didn't have that, and for now that saved me. But the look she gave me as the officer walked away, promising to file a report and investigate, told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't going to stop, not until she tore me apart piece by piece. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers after that. Some avoided me, some gave me subtle nods of support, and some just watched, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. That's the part of conflict. Most people don't care who's right, they just care who wins. That night I sat in the dark, the empty space in my driveway staring back at me like a wound. I should have felt victorious. I'd done what I set out to do. The car was gone. My driveway was mine again, but instead all I felt was unease, because this wasn't over. I hadn't beaten Karen, I'd provoked her. And then just past midnight I heard it, a noise outside, soft, deliberate like footsteps circling my house. My breath caught. I crept to the window, heart hammering, and there she was, Karen, flashlight in hand, scanning the side of my yard, muttering under her breath, searching, hunting. I froze, torn between flinging the door open and demanding what she thought she was doing, or staying quiet, letting her paranoia eat her alive. In the end, I chose silence. I let her wander, let her scribble something in that little notebook she always carried, let her storm off into the night. But I knew what that meant. She was building her case, gathering scraps, twisting them into a weapon, and sooner or later she'd bring it all crashing down on me. Funny thing is, instead of fear, a different thought settled in my chest as I crawled back into bed. If she wanted a war, maybe it was time I gave her one. Everyone thinks the real battles are fought in courtrooms, or with fists, or in the dead of night. But sometimes, the most brutal wars unfold in fluorescent-lit HOA meetings, where neighbors sit in folding chairs and pretend civility while daggers fly beneath the surface. That's where she struck next. The community center smelled faintly of burnt coffee and paper handouts, and I could already feel the tension the moment I walked in. Karen sat at the front, gavel in hand like a judge ready to deliver sentencing. Her smile was too wide, too rehearsed, and her eyes, they locked on me the moment I entered, burning with accusation. Neighbors whispered as I took my seat. Some avoided my gaze, others leaned forward, eager for the show. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to walk out. But no, this was what she wanted, to corner me, to break me in public. The meeting droned through landscaping updates and budget reports, but it was all just prelude. And then, with a sharp crack of her gavel, Karen leaned forward, voice dripping with faux concern. "Before we close tonight," she said sweetly, "there's a serious matter I feel compelled to address, a crime in fact." The room shifted, a murmur spread, my stomach dropped. "My vehicle," she continued, hand pressed dramatically to her chest, "was stolen last week, disappeared right from our neighborhood. And while the police are investigating," she paused, eyes sweeping the room, landing on me. "I believe it is my duty as HOA president to inform you that certain individuals here have a history of hostility, a history of making threats." Gasps, all eyes turned, and just like that I was on trial. I opened my mouth, but she raised a hand, silencing me. "I won't name names," she said, her lips curling, "but I think we all know who I mean." The silence was worse than shouting. Neighbors shifting uncomfortably, some nodding, some frowning, doubt seeping into the room like smoke. My pulse thundered. She was doing it again, twisting the story, painting me as the villain. And if I stayed silent, the narrative would stick, just like always. So I stood, my chair scraped the floor, sharp in the hush. My voice trembled at first, but it grew steadier with each word. "You're right, Karen," I said, eyes locked on hers. "We do have a history of you blocking my driveway, a history of you ignoring complaints, a history of you using your position to bully anyone who dares to speak up." A ripple moved through the room. Someone coughed, someone else muttered agreement. "And as for threats," I let the words hang, "I've made none, but if you want to talk about hostility, maybe we should discuss how you trespassed onto my property last night with a flashlight, or should I let the security cameras do the talking?" Her face blanched just for a second, a flicker, but it was enough for the whispers to turn, for the gasps to shift direction. She recovered quickly, plastering on her smile, but the damage was done. "Baseless accusations," she hissed. "Classic deflection." But the room wasn't fully with her anymore. For the first time, cracks showed in her armor. People were doubting her. People were doubting the Queen. I sat back down, heart pounding, hands slick with sweat. I hadn't planned that. The words had just come, born from months of being silent, from the fire she'd lit inside me. And as I watched her shift uncomfortably in her chair, I realized something important. She wasn't invincible. She could be rattled. Still, I knew this wasn't victory. This was just the opening salvo, because women like Karen don't crumble after one hit. They come back sharper, meaner, more dangerous. But I wasn't the same neighbor she'd been tormenting for months. Not anymore. Sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who start the fight. They're the ones who finally decide not to back down. And I wasn't backing down, not this time. Everyone thinks the fight is over when the meeting adjourns. But wars don't end when the gavel falls, they only change battlefields. And Karen, she wasn't retreating. She was regrouping. The days that followed were quiet but not peaceful. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was calculation. I'd catch glimpses of her at odd hours, standing at her window, scribbling in that little notebook, whispering into her phone with her back turned so no one could read her lips. And every time I felt it in my gut, she was digging, for something, for anything she could use against me. One morning, a man in a suit came knocking at my door. "Insurance investigator," he said, flashing a badge too quickly for me to read. He asked about Karen's car, where I was the night it vanished, if I'd seen anything unusual. His questions weren't neutral, they were leading, pointed, already assuming guilt. I answered calmly, carefully, every word weighed like I was walking a tightrope over fire. When he left, I could almost see her smirk in the distance, watching from her porch. But she didn't stop there. Flyers appeared on mailboxes. Protect our community from vandals. No names, but the implication was clear. At the coffee shop, two neighbors I'd known for years avoided eye contact. At the grocery store, whispers followed me down the aisle. She was poisoning the well, drop by drop. One night I found tire tracks in the grass near my side yard. Fresh, too fresh. My chest tightened as I walked the perimeter, flashlight trembling in my hand. Nothing was missing, nothing was broken, but that didn't matter. The message was clear: I can reach you. I can invade your space just like you invaded mine. For a moment, fear nearly broke me. It coiled tight around my chest, squeezing, reminding me of every time I'd been silenced before, every time I'd been labeled difficult. Maybe I should give in. Maybe I should let her win, let her reclaim her crown of control. But then I remembered the look on her face at the HOA meeting, the crack, the flicker of panic when I'd mentioned the cameras. For the first time, she hadn't looked untouchable. She looked human, fragile even, and that thought steadied me. If she wanted a war, fine, but I wasn't going to fight it on her terms. I wouldn't throw stones where she wanted me to. I'd set the stage, choose the spotlight, write the ending myself. So I began to prepare, quietly, carefully. I organized every photo, every timestamp, every video clip of her blocking my driveway. I compiled notes of her late-night trespassing, her threats, her public slander. Each piece of evidence wasn't just paper, it was armor. Protection against the storm I knew was coming. And then I started planning something bigger, not just defense, a strike she wouldn't see coming. See, Karen thrived on control, on reputation, on the illusion that she was untouchable, admired, obeyed. But illusions can shatter in an instant. All it takes is a single, undeniable truth to pierce through and I had that truth. I'd been collecting it for months without even realizing every slip, every overreach, every abuse of power. The question wasn't if I'd use it, the question was when. Because sometimes the revenge isn't making someone lose what they love, it's making them destroy it themselves. And Karen, she was already halfway there. All I had to do was give her one final push. Everyone waited for the next HOA meeting like it was a trial. You could feel it in the air, neighbors trimming their lawns extra neat, curtains twitching at every car that passed, whispers thick as fog. Karen had spent weeks feeding the fire, and tonight she was ready to set it ablaze. The community center lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh white shadows as the room filled. I sat near the back, calm on the outside but wired tight beneath the surface. In her chair at the front, Karen radiated confidence again, lipstick perfect, notes stacked neatly in front of her, the gavel resting like a weapon at her fingertips. She believed tonight was the night she'd bury me. She opened the meeting with her usual theatrics, but it didn't take long before she turned the spotlight where she always wanted it. "My friends," she began, voice dripping with false sorrow, "we have a serious issue of safety in our neighborhood. My vehicle was stolen, vanished, and while the police are still investigating, it's clear who had the motive." Her eyes snapped to mine, gasps rippled, my pulse thundered. She pulled out her notebook, flipping pages dramatically. "This resident has filed complaint after complaint against me. He's threatened me in writing, accused me publicly, and conveniently, the night my car disappeared, his driveway was mysteriously clear." The room buzzed, murmurs rose, I felt heat crawl up my neck, but I didn't move, not yet. "And so," she continued, voice sharp now, "I motion to have him removed from this community, for the safety and integrity of our neighborhood." Her words hung heavy. She'd done it, pushed the nuclear button. Some neighbors nodded, others looked uneasy, but all eyes turned to me. That's when I stood, slowly, calmly, and placed a thick folder on the table in front of me. "Before anyone votes," I said evenly, "there are things you should see." I opened the folder, spreading photos across the table. Karen's SUV blocking my driveway over and over. Time-stamped videos of her trespassing with a flashlight. Screenshots of emails she'd forgotten to answer. And then a clear clip from my security camera of her, late at night, standing in my yard, muttering into her phone about how she'd teach me a lesson. The room fell silent. Karen's face drained of color. "This," I said, voice steady, "is harassment. This is abuse of power. And this eye tap the final photo is trespassing, which, unlike your accusations, is actually a crime." The silence cracked into whispers. Shock, unease, people leaning closer to the evidence, shaking their heads. The power in the room shifted like a tide pulling out to sea. Karen stammered, reaching for her notes. These are fabricated lies. He's framing me." But her voice cracked, and in that crack everyone heard the truth. The HOA vice chair, a man who'd always nodded along with her before, cleared his throat. "Karen, these are serious allegations against you." Her mouth opened, but no words came, just silence. And then quietly I delivered the final blow. "As for your car, I didn't steal it, I didn't touch it. The truth is simpler. You left it unlocked in the rain that night. It rolled down the street, right into the hedges behind the rental property. The police found it this morning, 2 blocks away. Not stolen, not vandalized, just abandoned by you." Gasps filled the room, eyes widened. And for the first time, Karen looked small, not powerful, not feared, just small. She tried to speak, but no one listened. The gavel slipped from her fingers, clattering against the table. The neighbors, her allies, her audience turned away. And in that moment, she wasn't the queen of the HOA anymore. She was just another resident, stripped of her crown. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat. I just gathered my folder, stood tall, and walked out into the night. My driveway was empty now, but so was something else, the weight she'd held over me. Sometimes victory doesn't roar, sometimes it's quiet, a space reclaimed, a silence that finally feels like peace. And as I stepped into that silence, I knew one thing for certain. Her car was gone from my life for good.